Shit's about to.
Hey guys, welcome to the Unwracked Podcast. I'm Andrew Berry, and I'm joined by my co-hosts Kyle Wilkes and Phil Viz. Collectively, we have about 45 years of coaching between us from all levels, from first-time amateurs to top IFBB pros. We want to make this podcast for you guys, so let us know the topics you're interested in learning about. We plan on having interviews with some of the world's best coaches and athletes, and we want to cover some of the most important topics in bodybuilding, some of the topics that other podcasts do not cover. Today, we're just going to shoot the shit about current events in the world of bodybuilding, starting with the Toronto Pro. Guys, what do you think? Did you guys watch the show?
I saw the results. I saw the comparisons. It was really pretty much a two-man show, honestly. It was 8 people in the show. Wasn't incredibly deep. You know, I'd say probably half of them weren't really in the best shape, if I'm being honest. And it really came down to, Sass and Reagan. And I honestly think that Reagan dropped the ball on this one. It was his show to win or lose.
And you have a little bit of insight because you've helped in terms of being eyes-on with Reagan, in the last couple of days leading into shows in the past. What do you think he does wrong? Because I feel like the pictures we see online, a couple of days leading into the show, we're kind of wowed by his new size, but then you get to the stage pictures and you're like, or even in person, you're kind of left a little wanting. What do you think happens?
I mean, he's got such a nice physique. Like, even up front, like, seeing him in person, he's very 3D. So I went out to the Olympia, I think the last time that he was in the Olympia, with Dorian Hamilton, very good friend of mine, kind of like a second eye. So, I watched him peak, helped out with it. And, I saw, like, this specifically, like the picture you put up here, this bothers me about his posing because Reagan has extremely striated glutes, like, genetically. Mm-hmm. And that's a conditioned muscle. That's something you want to show off. But he sticks his ass out in the back poses to show his adductors. I would prefer to show the striated glutes to show condition, especially because he struggles with it. I tell all my guys, if you're conditioned, you show your Christmas tree, you show your serratus, you show your glutes, you show your hams. Things like that. You squat down on the side poses to show the flickers in the quads. So if you have something, you show it. And I know he's got extremely striated glutes, but you can't see it here because of the way he's posing. So he's hurting himself. But the fact of the matter is, it just looks like he dropped the ball. And, I'm going to say something a little controversial here because I don't know for sure. So everybody, this is pure speculation. Just from the experience that I have and the things that I know about Reagan is. I don't know if it's still the case, but in the past, I know people have said that he takes extremely low doses, like very, very low doses. And maybe you guys can give your own perspective on this. But, like, I think if you're taking, like, 50 milligrams of Masteron every other day and that's your hardener, you're not going to be rock hard on stage. It's just not going to happen. Like, you need like a certain level of dose to really have that granite hard look. And, too low of a dose really isn't going to work. But I don't know. What do you guys think about that?
I think the what you're saying with Masteron, that makes sense. Hardeners, all of that would play a role. But I also I think this is Regan's 3rd show this year, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And to me, obviously the goal is when you step on stage each time you want to get better, and we have the luxury of seeing these two gentlemen stand next to each other I think 3 times in a row practically.
Yeah.
So in my take, I guess, to go against what you're saying a little bit, Phil, was I seen him better at a prior show. So I don't think it was necessarily a drug thing. It's probably a water, sodium thing, something like that. Something with the peak week went wrong, I would imagine, right? Because I think, as Andrew touched on, in Instagram posts or any social media platform you see him on, he did look a little bit better going into peak week, it seemed, right? So whether, yes, can the posing be a little bit better that would present him to be stronger? Yeah, but in this case, even if he hit the poses better, the look, he's softer than he should be. We've seen him better. So, something happened for sure. And then Sass, I think this might be one of his better looks of all the shows. I think it's his 4th show he's done this year where he's got 3 seconds in a row. So he's been persevering, taking the defeats and showing up, and arguably this might be his best, and obviously it was good enough to take away the victory.
Well, let me ask you on another kind of side topic. What do you think about some of the guys like Sauce and Reagan doing, say, 3 or 4 shows in like a 5-6 week period? Typically, and I'll just give my quick opinion. I would think a guy would tend to get worse in the case of like Reagan, because I agree with you, Kyle. And then I do find it kind of an enigma that Sauce kind of looks a little bit better, I think, than he did it, definitely than he did at New York, and we both saw that in person. I think just from these pictures, he looks better than he did at New York. But what do you guys think about the extended preps as an open bodybuilder?
Well, the first thing I want to say is we know it's not impossible because Kyle just did it with Nick Walker, and he came in better the second show. So, yes, you're right. It is harder show to show. But if the coach really knows what they're doing, prime example, it could be done.
I'm not talking about, I think 2 shows is fine, in a 3-week period,
It's still tough. It's still tough.
Oh, it's very tough. But like you get the first one and you're like, okay, we either need to be harder, we need to be drier, we need to be fuller, he needs to be more conditioned. So you have your variables that you can work with within the time frame. But like I'm talking about, kind of like how Milos used to compete, like, what did he compete 14 times in one season, I think it was. Maintaining a pretty
condition wasn't
look.
really like what it is today. Like there wasn't that standard.
That's true. Yeah.
But I think Kyle's right as far as the peak. We've seen him 3 times now, and I don't think that he's been close any of the times as far as what he could look like and as far as some of the progress pictures that we've seen. So while I do think that drugs are a part of it, I don't think it was all of it. I mean, if I'm being perfectly honest, he just missed his peak all 3 times. And again, having experience with Reagan, I know he pays attention and I know he follows instructions, So, you tell him something once, he's going to remember it, he's going to do it. He's very good at that typically, I believe, at least from what I've experienced during peaks. Yeah. So, whatever's going on with the peak, they need to change the approach because it's just not working.
One thing I want to say that I noticed being in the audience at New York was I was very underwhelmed by Reagan's conditioning from the front. But then when he turned around, it was like a different athlete. Like his back and his back in particular was so dialed in. And then lower body, glutes, and everything were in, like you said, Phil. What do you think that is? Like when an athlete just gets because typically you see it the other way around, right? You see an athlete's in shape from the front, quads are striated usually, and then they turn around and it's the other way. So what do you guys think happened here?
Well, I think it's just a matter of more development on the backside. He's posterior chain strong, right? So hams, glutes, back, he's strong on the backside. He's not strong on the front side. Yeah. So it just makes more sense. But let me ask you, didn't he come out looking pretty good and then fade quick in New York?
I was still not impressed with his condition from the front, from the first couple poses. And then,
he
did
backside
fade.
Faded a little bit, I think, didn't it?
Yeah, no, it did. But I think it's hard to say because you're watching, and Nick just kept getting harder and harder. And William kept on getting harder and harder as well, at least in prejudging. So it's like when you got 2 guys that are kind of, if you got 3 guys that you're really looking at for a show, and 2 guys are getting harder and they're keeping up with each other, and one guy starts to face, it makes a very easy decision for the judges on who you're locking in on, right? And I think that's what they did for that show at least. I think he did fade a little bit. I think he was sweating a good amount. Some water was coming out as well. And sometimes that makes an athlete look better. Sometimes it just makes them look soggy. But while we're kind of on the topic, because you brought it up, Phil, about low PEDs, I think our listeners might be interested. What do you think a low PED cycle would be for an open bodybuilder? Because we've all worked with IFBB pros, and we've worked with guys at the open level, 250 plus. Start with you, Phil. What do you think is, I'm not going to say too little, but you would look at a cycle and say, man, I don't know if you're going to be able to hang the same way.
If I looked at a competitor, and I want the listeners to keep this in mind, I'm going to say something controversial. I'm sure a bunch of pros are going to be up in arms about it. A bunch of people are not going to like it, but a lot of people are also going to confirm it, is that the vast majority of pros lie about what they take. So don't go by what you think somebody took because they said it on a podcast. I think Ian's generally pretty honest, but the vast majority of them are not. Yeah. So don't go by, you're wrong because this guy said this on a podcast. He's just lying, because I've literally witnessed people where I knew what they took, either because they directly asked me or they directly asked a friend and we discussed it and they said it on the podcast. I'm like, that's definitely not true, But I think I would say if you're looking at 100 master on 100 train every other day, something like that, it's just too low. It's not going to be strong enough to have a really hardening effect on a really muscular physique. That's my opinion.
Yeah. What do you think, Kyle?
I think you got to consider a few things. The person's level of development, what they're looking to achieve. Do some people need to get harder? That requires certain compounds to be used, maybe certain AIs in place, things like that. I would think most of the time, at least from what I've come across, and you guys can disagree, I do think many competitors get to a point where they wind up taking less than they used to take.
I'll agree with that.
And the point of diminishing return, or for somebody, something like trend, does it help? Absolutely, but it usually comes with a slew of side effects that aren't just always sweating, right? If you can't sleep and now the person's recovery capabilities are diminished, that's a problem. I'd rather not use it. From personal anecdotal experience, I've used it in the past, and I thought maybe I had a lot of stuff going on in life. Let me take a little bit more. Maybe it'll help. It didn't. I got to the point where I said, I'm just going to get rid of this because I'm getting worse somehow, taking more of what's supposed to be the best quote unquote anabolic around, right? So I think it varies. I would say at the end of the day, I don't think anybody in the Olympia stage isn't taking Masteron. If I had to pick one thing, do I know some that barely use any trend? Yes, for sure, right? I think, Chris Bumstead, he's not someone that's taking trend for a couple of reasons. So it's achievable, but I think Masteron is something for sure. Do I think everyone uses Proviron? No. Do I think everyone uses Halo? No. Do I think a lot try to abuse it toward the end? Yeah, because it works very quickly, right? Do I think people are getting to this level of conditioning with no AIs at all? No, I don't think they're getting to that. We have people that abuse AIs drastically, right? So those are the things I think are essential, and that's where health problems and stuff can develop. But I think it depends on how many shows. So going full circle here, and then I'll give it back to you. When you're doing show after show after show, you have to consider, okay, how much is this person taking to get here? How hard is it diet? Are they just coasting right in? This is Sauce's 5th show, arguably one of his better looks. Could it just be a matter of peaking to a degree? But I would imagine he's not dieting as hard now that he was 5-6 weeks ago, whenever that first show was. So I think you have to consider that. Whereas sometimes when people push to that first show and they're still short on conditioning, now it's a little more challenging, especially if they already were taking all the compounds and then they're trying to kind of get back in,
Yeah. I mean, I can remember just my own experience with dieting. It was always my second show was better. First one, struggling to get into condition. And then I looked flat, right? And then once you're already in shape, you start the reverse process. You might be eating 2 to 3 times the amount of carbs you're eating on the hard stretches going into that first one. Your stress is a little bit lower. You're getting better sleep at that point. Your body's filling out. It's just a better look. So, yeah, I agree with that 100%. How about you, Phil?
I think that your point about being better the second show has something to do with just, again, a lot of people just don't get ready early enough, right? Because you arguably want to be ready early enough to where, like you said, you could reset, be healthy, coast in. And I think Kyle made a phenomenal point on the trend, because this is actually something that I do now. Is because we get so many side effects with trend, and there's so many adverse effects and even mental effects, sleeping, all of those things. So I think trend is most important in that part of the diet where you're really peeling hard to try to get peeled, because it's going to be your strongest supporting agent, right? It's going to be the most anti-catabolic, it's going to be most anabolic, it's going to help you push in the gym with the aggression. So it'll get you through that hard part. But like you guys said, arguably you should be ready 2-3 weeks out. And at that point, you can start backing the trend down, because it's done its job. It's not going to do anything more. The only thing it's going to do is cause you problems. So, yeah, you could start tapering it down now towards the show. And like Kyle said, Masteron is the one that everybody is going to really rely on. So I think that if you're ready early, you can let the body rest, kind of coast in. This is always going to be different depending on what we're trying to do, right? If we know we don't have a very seasoned competitor with dense muscle, we're not going to be able to get them as hard and peeled as somebody that we know can, because we're going to tear muscle off them, right? But if we're talking Olympia level, you got to be bone peeled out of your mind, So for those people, you're going to go a little bit harder. You want to come down slower. You want to be ready early. Whereas if you're not really trying to push for that type of condition, I think this is something also listeners need to understand, is that come into a local show, you're 25 years old, your muscle's brand new. You're not trying to get Olympia level conditioning, because you're not going to hold that muscle if you try that. It's going to peel off. So your coach always has to find the best balance of where you're going to be best without destroying your physique. We have to remember this is bodybuilding, not body peeling, shredding, right? You're just dieting off muscle. And some people even do that to try to get really peeled. You're like, well, what happened to their legs? So I think this is decision-making process. But that's what I think on the topic anyway.
Yeah. I mean, the only time, well, all right, getting back to my original question about, low dose, high dose, I don't think there's an IFBB open bodybuilder going into a show taking less than, we'll say 1,700 milligrams, we'll say 4 weeks out, because maybe a lot of guys pull their testosterone at some point, 2 weeks out, 10 days, whatever. But I think somewhere around the 1,700 minimum at 4 weeks out, between like 700 test minimum, the Masteron probably 700 to 1,000, and then your orals, Winstrol. A lot of people use Winstrol and Enovar together, Proviron, Halo testing if you're adding that in, and Tren. So, I want to get back to your point, Phil, about, a lot of guys, I barely take anything. I'm only on 1,000 milligrams of total product. And if you're 250 pounds plus in shape on stage, you either have the best genetics of all time, or you're just flat out lying to us. I should say it's a little different when you're a classic guy and you got to make that weight cap, and the guy's already in shape at 2, 3, 4 weeks out, and now you're like, how am I going to get another 7 pounds off this guy, and make him make weight? So I think that's where some of the PEDs come into hand in terms of pulling back.
If you even look at the totals, if you look at perspective here, like I'll tell you, for a pro show, I am not doing less than 100 mgs of Winnie a day for the last 4 weeks. I usually do about 100 mgs of Winnie a day for the last 4 weeks. That's 700. You do 100 mgs of Masteron a day, that's 1,400 already. 2 things.
Exactly. And that's more the norm. That's more the norm than like a Phil Viz thing, right? Like that's a fairly standard. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so I think we covered all that stuff. Do you guys want to give a physique critique on my guy that competed yesterday?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. Let me pull these up.
And this is something we want to do regularly, right, on episodes?
Yeah, I think we should all share, not all at the same time, but each episode. This is my client, Wilkes Giannini. He's out of MI40. Really good person. Like, I was telling Rachel, yesterday, I'm like, he's the most polite person I've ever met. He's the type when you're like in his hotel room, every time you get up to leave, he gets up. And, he's dog tired. He hasn't eaten in 2 days because we had to make weight. He's getting up, opening the door for me, and thanking me for coming to visit him. Like, very, like, etiquette and very proper.
Bro,
like,
funny story.
Americans aren't like that.
Bro, funny story. When I was going out to, help Dorian with his guys, Antoine Gallant was cooking people fucking meals. I walked in the room, he's like, here, I made you a meal. I'm like, dude, I could eat McDonald's. We're here to worry about you. Don't worry about us.
Yeah.
He's like, but yeah, you guys are hungry, you didn't eat. I'm like, who cares?
Though,
he was concerned about everybody else.
Well, sometimes, maybe an athlete like him, he gets in his own head. He's like, if I stay busy doing productive...
No, he's just really nice.
Okay. Because I know, like, I used to do a lot of client work in the mornings before shows. I remember I got a new plan out to someone the day of, and then they saw me online on Instagram competing. They're like, dude, didn't you compete today? You made my plan this morning by 10 a.m. And I was like, yeah, I needed something to do. I already had my color on, and I had 3 hours to chill before prejudging, But anyway, yeah, this is Wilkes. This is one of his classic shots. I'll keep going through.
He looks like a good poser in that shot.
He's a very good poser. I'm trying to... Some of these are
I always say
shots.
you can really tell how serious somebody is, how much they care by how much they put into their posing.
Yeah.
He's in great condition.
Yeah, he was in good shape. I want you guys to see his back though. Let me pull up his. Oh shit! Did I not copy? Hold on one second. I didn't pull up.
It's funny. You just closed out the open bodybuilding pictures, then you open up this, and it's like you can really see the contrast in conditioning.
Yeah, so I meant to have a back shot because my critique was going to be that we got to get his upper back, not just in better shape, because he's got thicker skin in his upper back. Like, a lot of athletes have thicker skin in certain areas. Like you can see his legs, like his legs are just like dialed in,
Oh, yeah.
And his upper body's dialed in, but it's his upper back that, like, if I were to pick,
You're not going to get tighter than that from the front.
That's what I mean, without being completely flat, And he didn't eat all day. He had 2 meals Thursday, 3 small meals on Thursday, and then I think 2 like 3-ounce chicken portions before he had to make weight because, he was like 10 pounds over a couple
Why
days.
don't you tell us a little bit about what you did in that situation? Because he was 10 pounds over, he had to make weight, he didn't get to eat a lot, and then obviously you had to fill him out. So what was your thought process there?
So, all right, my thought process with every athlete is I don't want to use diuretics to make weight if I don't have to, right? I would rather save that for after we make weight and after we get a few meals back in you, and then use it more as damage control if we need it, right? I'm not going to say I always do that, because there's some athletes where you just have to do a little something because they're already bone dry. There's no way, But for him, we pulled his food back, and he was already eating very low food. Obviously, he was low carb, zero carbs for the last 4 weeks with one sushi refeed, and then he hit weight. I think he hit weight literally an hour before we had to weigh in. So, he flew in the night before. All day Friday, it was check-ins every hour on his weight, pictures, and we had pushed his water pretty high at about 7.5 liters, starting like 2 weeks out, and then on Tuesday I pulled it back to 6, and then on Wednesday I pulled it back to 4. Yeah, 4, and then Friday I think I pulled it back to 2.5. And then I think we restricted water for about 6 hours before he had to make weigh-ins, because he was like teetering right above that. And I had him walking, and I had him go to the gym and just sweat some stuff off. So anyway, we didn't have to use diuretics to make weight, which I'm always very happy about, because I just don't like to start using. I don't like to give an athlete something that could be somewhat unpredictable, if I don't have to. And in the previous years, he'd been using, aldactone and diazide, many days out to make weight. So I wanted to avoid that technique, because I felt he looked like someone that did too many diuretics and then just couldn't fill out. And we all know, we know, but maybe the listeners don't. Using something like aldactones, it's not my favorite diuretic to use, because it's going to block aldosterone. You're going to block sodium reuptake. So you're not going to fill an athlete out properly if you're not absorbing sodium properly, right? Especially when you're taking in carbohydrates. So I wanted to avoid that scenario. And then for this,
how much did you feed him? I want to know.
So after we made weight, we kept it very controlled, because this is my first time working with him, and I didn't want to do something crazy. I wanted to bring a very conservative approach. So we cut his protein down to like 100 grams of turkey, 93.7 turkey, and did 250 grams of rice and a banana. And we did that 5 times that night. Okay. And then we did that meal 2 more times, but with protein cut to like 60 grams for 2 meals before going on stage. And then we did, I think 3 Rice Krispie treats, maybe 4 Rice Krispie treats in the hour before getting on stage, right before this look, basically. So I think we nailed his peak, honestly. I think he looked really good. He just ran into a really tough class. He finished 6th in the show. He ran into some guys that had been, the guy Andy, he had won the Legion and he had won the Shreveport show. So this was his 3rd win. And then a couple of the guys that had been 2nd and 3rd in those groupings, they also came and did this show. And they kind of stayed in the same spots. So it was, he definitely made some improvements in his conditioning. Because if you look his pictures up from the past, he wasn't in this kind of condition. And that was my goal for him, was to really nail his conditioning.
Yeah. I think you did that.
No. Yeah, I was loving his look. I'm trying to find, I thought I had a back shot, but I might not have loaded it up. So he's a guy, so here's something. I'd be interested in you guys' thoughts. You got a guy who already struggled to make weight, and the judges want to see a little bit more back development out of him. They love his legs. His legs are nuts. He's got crazy arms, but they want to see more back development. So what do you guys do in a situation where a guy's already, a week out, 10 pounds overweight, to put that tissue on?
Kyle, you can take this one.
So you're saying, just so I understand, you're saying the feedback after the show.
Feedback after the show.
Or muscle group.
Yeah. And while you're doing that, I'm going to pull up another picture. So go ahead and talk.
He's pretty much already pushing max with where he is, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I think the main thing is, at least for any athlete, I would always emphasize, is that reverse period is going to be really crucial, right? Yep. Because if they start to put on excess body fat and now their body weight's climbing and they're 40 pounds above stage weight, that's going to be a bitch to come off, because that new muscle they just put on, again, it's not solidified, right? It's going to fall right off.
Yep.
So aside from that, typically, again, these are pros, but they're not people that are amateurs where they're missing a muscle group. It's just, hey, we need to see a little bit more. So that's where I change usually the training a little bit, the emphasis perhaps toward the end of the prep, making sure there's detail work behind it. Sometimes I'll marry the diet nutritionally with the training groups that we're doing. So for example, you said that he was on 0 carbs. Ideally, again, I'm never letting his weight get so high that I need to 0 carb him 4 to 5 weeks out, because it's probably going to pull down muscle a little bit. And on top of that, I'm trying not to have him on 0 carb days if he's hitting his back, for example, right? So I think those are the main things. It's just, is there enough time that has went by that where he's actually accrued tissue, and is he growing in the right places? So that's the main thing. It's usually, again, very specific of these levels of athletes, right? I don't think he's at a point where, you got someone like Derek, for example, sucking down to 212. He really couldn't get much better. It was just always impossible for him to make it, essentially, right? That's why he's in open, and, see how good he does in open. So I think it's two different conversations in that regard. But in this case, I would spend time making sure his weight doesn't get too high, to where you also take away from the fact that, for classic guys, proportions are what matter, right? So if his waist grows an inch or two because you start putting deadlifts or rack deads in, now it doesn't really matter. His back is quote unquote denser and better, but he doesn't look any better on stage. He actually looks worse.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is definitely something to be said about how you put the muscle on. That's a very good point that I actually wasn't even thinking about. Is if you start deadlifting, you could put muscle and weight on his waistline too, which is just going to hurt him rather than help him. My train of thought was, does he have any muscle groups that are overpowering the rest of his physique that you could kind of give a little bit to kind of balance out the back a little bit, right? Like, for example, we could look at his posing right here, and what I can tell you first of all is that he's got a little bit of an arch into the middle of his lower back. So if he were to do a half of an ab crunch and push that spine out towards us a little bit, the muscle jump off his back a little bit more. I think that's a major mistake that every amateur makes and a lot of pros make, is, you kind of make your back concave instead of convex. So you kind of pull the muscles into your frame rather than pushing them off the frame. So I tell people, try to push your mid-back, try to push your low traps out at the judges. And you can see he's arching a little bit there. So that right there might just visually give a better, a thicker look to the back muscle. So that would help. But he's definitely going to need something in there, the teres and lats region for sure. Yeah. Even in the lower traps he could. So you're probably looking at improvements of, I'd say anywhere from 2 to 4 pounds would probably do it, right, of muscle in the upper back. But you're going to have to pull that from somewhere else because of how hard it is to make weight, right?
Well, I'll tell you, my plan is to pull some leg training volume and frequency. I mean, if you look at his hamstrings, look at his glutes, like, he's got the legs, and he's got let me put up another leg picture here. Come on. Screen. You know what I mean? Like, he's got the legs, he's got quads, he's got development.
They're not going to go anywhere.
No, that's the thing. So, yeah, I mean, that was my plan, was to put more emphasis and more of his nutrition based around his back training. But I'm not adding anything like deadlifts in. Like, it's not that he has a large waist, because you see when he does his classic shot, his waist just sinks right up and his vacuum is crazy. But, like, straight on, without doing that, if you're in a straight on shot, it's not the most narrow. So I'm not adding anything like that. But I definitely think the point Kyle made about the post-show being the most important piece of this whole puzzle, I agree with that 100%. He doesn't need to be 30 to 40 pounds over stage weight, 12 to 20 based on the time of the year, really,
The other thing I wanted to point out was more of a posing thing as well. And his back double, if you can pull that back up. Phil, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts, but I feel that other than that slight crunch on his abs, right, that's going to push the spine mid-back out and probably change the look a little bit, I also think his arms aren't as high as they need to be.
So let me touch on that. Let me touch on that real quick. So if I wish I had a picture of when we started, because he had a lot of scapular issues, and we started working with a really good chiropractor who is really into all the internal shoulder muscles, all the different exercises you should be doing when you have those types of issues. Like, you'll notice, see how this hand's out a little wider, this one crunches in. that's something like every time I'm like, no, dude, like we need to even these out. And I try to show him in the pictures. The other difficulty is he doesn't speak much English, so there's a lot of translation stuff that goes on between his wife, who's also English is her second language. So trying to like show him the exercises, which he does diligently. When I say this guy is like the kind of client you want, 110%, comes in the gym, looks like $1 million, stays covered up until it's time to just pose for his pictures, does all the therapy you want him doing, does all the exercises, and then says thank you when he leaves the gym every day. Like he's the dream client. But yeah, no, I agree with you about the elbows, 100%. That's something that was one of our keywords. I actually learned it. She was teaching me Portuguese, which is what Brazilians use, so I could yell those things out to him on stage. And some of it sunk through, and some of it didn't. In this shot, it didn't really sink in.
Yeah.
Like for instance, he didn't hit his abs, so I'm sitting there like abidabos, you know. So yeah, it was kind of funny. But
if we're going to talk about posing changes, you could pull that back up real quick.
Oh sure.
For what Kyle asked me before, there's numerous things that we can do. So people think that posing is just black and white; it's just one size fits all, and it's not. Like if you guys ever look at Flex Lewis's back of the bicep, his hands are purposely internally rotated to stick the triceps out more. But also, when you internally rotate those hands, you're giving up bicep and front delt peak, but you're gaining back density, right? You're gaining back thickness. So you've got to kind of find your spot. Like when I competed, I didn't have that big popping detail in the upper back, but I had the biceps and the front delts. So I rotated my hands all the way back, basically like I don't care about the back. I have my V taper. I'm going to show off my delts and arms. So you can show off the showcase across the top, the mountain peaks, or you can show off the triceps in the back. You know, so which one is going to be better? And like Kyle said, if you bring the arms and shoulders up a little bit, that's going to make the front delts look bigger. And when the front delts look like they're popping more, to set the biceps off, and the biceps are going to look like they're popping off more. But what that's going to also do is lengthen the back muscles. So if you bring the shoulders up a little bit, you're going to lengthen the back muscles, and you're going to lose density to the back, but you're going to gain those mountain peaks across the top. So you've everybody's got to find their own sweet spot, kind of what they want to show off, where their strengths are, where their weaknesses are. Because like Flex knew he didn't have a great back, so he's like, I'm going to make this a back double lower body and triceps pose, and he won the pose, you know. But if you crop out his back, you're like, no offense to Flex, no offense if you're watching this, his back wasn't very good, but he won the back double bicep because it was a glutes, hams, and shoulders and triceps pose for him.
Adductors.
And he did it well. So everybody can kind of play with their hand orientation and their shoulder level based on what they're trying to show off. And with him,
well, to
I
your
still
point,
would say I'd push that mid back out a little bit.
Well, to your point, Phil, okay, so look at this delt versus this one.
Well, he's internally rotated on the left side.
Okay, but hold on. Okay, but then look at the tricep on this side, and the whole arm as a whole versus this side. So it's almost like if we could get the best out of both in that situation. Like if his delt matched on this side and the triceps and arms matched on this side, it would obviously more back development, but it would be a killer shot from a structural standpoint. You know.
Well, if I have somebody who has bicep peaks to spare, I'm going to go with the internal rotation.
Yeah.
If they have flat biceps, I'm going to really try to move those hands back. You know, so it's going to depend. But the real way you want to hit a back double bicep is you just want to think of it like a behind the back neutral grip lat pull down, behind the neck lat pull down. You know, you want to kind of almost picture your back not oriented with your head, but you know, a space back, and then you're trying to pull straight down on top of that while staying wide. You know, and that's how you're going to really hit your back double. But I think that if you push that mid back out a little bit and even the arms out like you're saying, it'll help the pose. His arms are also a little uneven with, you know, how far he has that. And even though the judges aren't looking at that going, that arm's not right, as human beings, we are wired to appreciate symmetry. We see it as health. We see it for mating, all these things. Like symmetrical faces are the ones we feel are most attractive. So that's going to affect the judge's perception, whether they're looking at it or not subconsciously. Uneven hands, uneven position, it's going to affect the way they're looking at the physique. Just like we like even abs, right? We don't like the uneven ones because, you know, it looks unsymmetrical. Yeah, so evening that out, I think would help too. Yeah.
Absolutely. No, I agree. I'm excited for him though. He's shutting the rest of the year down. He lost his mother during this prep. Like literally like a couple days after they found out that him and his wife were pregnant. So it was a very emotional prep for him. So he's shutting it down because he wanted to do it because he committed to it, but he wants to really be there for his wife. He's a really good family person, very just a nice, decent person. So he wants to be their supportive husband in this process of their pregnancy. But yeah, so good things for him in the future. Do you guys have anything else you want to talk about today, or I think we're pretty good, huh?
I think we're pretty good on the first episode. We want to let people, let us know what they want to see and what they like, and get more interactive. And we're, this is just, like I said, just a rough draft of what we're doing, guys. So like we're gonna really, really put some effort into this. We're really gonna structure it. We're really gonna do it well. We want to be a standout podcast. We don't want to just be like one of the others. So we're gonna ask for your help here in, telling us what you want to see so that we can produce it.
Absolutely. So if people want to reach out to you for coaching, Phil, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
Always on Instagram. Just shoot me a DM, send in an application. We could schedule a phone call if you want to, and we can just move from there.
Kyle, how about you?
Same, via Instagram. I'm not really taking many folks these days, but I have a team under me, so I will do my best to push people in the right direction.
Awesome. And you guys can reach out through me DM or to bodyberry.com. Guys, we're going to link our Instagram profiles and everything into the notes. And like I said, subscribe, leave questions, comments. We will read every single one of them, and we will try to respond to every single one of them.
And send this to your friends.
Send it to your friends, tag us, all that kind of stuff. And till next time, this is Unwracked.